Welcome to Taking the Myth, your topical, skeptical discussion show. I'm Stephen Knight, and joining me is Iram Ramzan. How you doing?
I'm good, Stephen. How are you?
Wonderful. Can't complain. Yeah, I can actually.
I was just going to say, really?
Yeah,
I can.
You're about to get about 2 hours of it, so buckle up, everybody. So what's new? I suppose we best start with the coronavirus and talking about where we are in the grand scheme of things when it comes to the lockdown. It might be worth contrasting our opinions to where we were a few months back. I think I was probably a lot stronger in my views about the lockdown than I am now. I've got a bit lazy. I've just been walking around spitting in people's mouths and licking guardrails and
yeah, I've been licking door handles as well. You know,
taking a bite out of the apples in Tesco and putting them back. Things like that.
You mean you didn't already do that before?
Yeah, coughing at grandma's. No, I've been a good boy. I followed the rules because I'm going to be honest. I don't know anything. I am not an expert. I'm in no position to give any advice on this topic. So, like a good little boy, I've been following the advice of the authorities, the government. And that might turn out to be slightly more over-exaggerated than we initially thought. I don't know where you are on this at the minute.
Well, I was never happy with lockdown.
No, you were always a bit fed up with. Yeah, you were fed up before the lockdown started.
I was. I mean, I could see initially why it was going to be inevitable, but then, you know, the Black Lives Matter protest started happening, and then just social distancing went out the fucking window. And, you know, suddenly nobody's bothered about social distancing anymore, but we're still going to criticize people going to the beach because, you know, that's way worse. The virus prefers the beach, you know.
Did you know that if you are gathering in mass for a righteous left-wing cause, the coronavirus isn't contagious? It's like it develops some natural...
Sounds more like
antibodies.
A Corbyn virus.
I think they call them the virtue signals. I think you develop some excessive level of virtue signals within your system. It's called the halo effect, and you can't contract the... I mean, I'm not a doctor, you know, look it up, do your own research, don't take my advice. Yeah, I've had a bit of a journey on this. I spoke to, just a very quick plug, because I like to speak to people who are, quote unquote, controversial, or not necessarily controversial. It's not about contrarianism, but people who are not afraid to delve into taboo subjects or areas of controversy, because they're the areas you need to delve into, really. It's kind of figure.
It wasn't me, was it? Because I don't recall a conversation with you recently.
But I mean, what's the point of talking to people who just say all the safe and easy things? So I've started, because we've all figured out how to use Zoom and video conferencing because of the pandemic, thought now might be a good time to produce some video interviews. So I've had... call them the Night Tube, put them on YouTube. I've had Macy Gifford on there, so go and check that out. youtube.com/gspellchecker. Thank you very much. And I've just uploaded an interview with Toby Young. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with Toby Young, but he's started a group called the Lockdown Skeptics, people who question the official advice. He has plenty to say about that. And I don't know where I stand with it, because, like I say, I'm not an expert. And he makes very compelling points. But because I don't know everything about this incredibly complex subject, I don't know how to push back and in the right way. I think the main argument now is whether or not the potential spread of the virus was miscalculated, shall we say, at the start of this coronavirus, whether the models were as accurate and on point as we were led to believe. I don't know if you've got any opinions on this.
Yeah, so, Professor Ferguson was the scientist who predicted about 500,000 British people would die from coronavirus. And then it turns out he broke lockdown rules to meet his married lover. So, yeah. Now, I think it was based on his claims that we went into full lockdown in the first place, because what the government was initially trying to do was, have encouraged people to work from home where possible and tell people to social distance and not go out until, unless it was absolutely necessary. And people were starting to do that anyway. I remember about 2 weeks before the lockdown, and the tube was getting quieter. I wasn't rammed up someone's armpit like usual. So people were already starting to do that. And that's a pattern I've noticed with this government. They seem to be very reactive. They're not proactive at all. And then, based on Professor Ferguson's coding, they went into full lockdown mode. Whereas initially they wanted to build up herd immunity and see where it panned out. Shield the most vulnerable. And I think the vulnerable were already starting to do that. If you have underlying health symptoms, just stay at home, don't go out. Be very, careful about personal hygiene as well. Just wash your hands often. And yeah, if anyone starts getting symptoms, self-isolate for 7 or 14 days. And we didn't have a chance to really find out how that was going to pan out, whether that would have worked. And I think, there's been some research to suggest that actually the peak of the virus and the infections was actually, it was not too long into the lockdown. So it would have been, because obviously it takes about 3 weeks for it all to kick in.
Yeah.
So it would have been just before lockdown was implemented, which makes you wonder, was it all necessary in the first place? And I guess we won't really know now, because we didn't have a chance to find out if we would have built that herd immunity or just have people shield if they're voluntarily self-isolate or work from home as and when, and just have people just be careful. I guess we won't know.
What I think's really odd, and I'm going to preface this by saying don't take any advice from me. As a matter of fact, I'm not offering advice. Listen to the government, listen to the experts. I'm happy to say that. Don't, challenge whatever you hear from Toby Young on my YouTube channel. Find out that I'm going to treat you like adults and trust that you will go and find the correct information yourself. But the issue I have is, I don't know if you remember, several weeks ago, way over a month now in fact, there was a visible difference in the streets, in the local parks, in public areas, of people completely relaxed, behaving. You could walk around as though there were no lockdown a while back. So inevitably, you would think that would result in a huge spike of cases, confirmed cases. And what we've seen is they continue to go down. So I don't...
Well, we have seen some... Apparently, we've seen cases go up in Leicester, for example.
Yeah. So
in the last month or so, cases went up dramatically in Leicester. And they're going to delay opening several places now and extend lockdown for a further 2 weeks to see if that number falls. So I think if we continue to see numbers rise elsewhere, if there's a spike elsewhere, they may have to start shutting things down. It might end up being, this is going to be like a pattern everywhere now, stop and start, start localized lockdowns in places where infections rise and then slowly start opening up again. I don't know, but you are right. I've been starting seeing more and more people out driving more locally. I mean, central London is still a ghost town. I've been out. I went out for the first time last week into central London in 4 months, and it was
really,
it was just, because I've just been staying local. I stay at home because I work from home, and then I just go to the supermarket once a week, and that is pretty much it. I've just been staying local, and I've started seeing more cars on the road recently, and people are driving about a bit more. But in central London, no. I was in Westminster the other day, and this was a Saturday afternoon. Almost empty.
Like 28 days later.
It really was. It was like the aftermath of a zombie apocalypse. There were just, a few cyclists, and they're fucking annoying me now as well. Bloody cyclists everywhere.
Fuck cyclists.
Fuck them
all. Fucking cyclists.
I bet they were vegan as well.
Fucking lycra wearing cunts, the lot of them. I would after this pandemic, I would happily beat a cyclist to death with a fucking jogger.
Yeah, that's the other thing. joggers. I never noticed them before because,
scum.
Obviously I wasn't home before, so I didn't notice if people were exercising. And lo and behold, they're there running past you, brushing past you, and
fucking
doing that
pavement.
annoying breathing.
Fuck off. Like,
Disgusting,
your germs,
dirty, infected particles.
You might as well get a big handful of your forehead sweat and just slap us across the face as you run by. I find that really irritating.
You're right, but you know what? People, I've seen pictures in the media of people gathering in parks and whatnot, and they're saying, "Oh, look at all these people out here! Oh, how dare they go out in the sun!" And pictures. I have to say, pictures can be very, very deceptive, because I went out into Hyde Park and it was absolutely scorching hot as well. So people are going to be out, and you know what? Everyone was keeping their distance. Yeah. Everyone was staying apart. Nobody was brushing into each other. People were, sat, I would say, a minimum 2 meters apart, if not more than that. But if I had taken a picture of that scene, and I did, and I showed my landlady as well. I said, look at that picture. You can't tell how far apart they are. They actually look like they're all really close together, but they're not.
Yeah, photos can be deceptive. I'll tell you what isn't deceptive, really though, and maybe we brushed over this too quickly, but what happens now, because we've got social media and 24-hour news, the country is absolutely furious and outraged by one issue, and then another issue comes along, and it's as if that other issue doesn't matter. It drops off the face of the earth, thus demonstrating it probably wasn't that important in the first place. And I'm talking about Dominic Cummings. Now, you might disagree with what he did. Fine, I think it's murky. We've spoke about it on the podcast. People can go back and check the last episode. I personally, I'm not enraged about a man taking a car to drive to a different house with his wife and kids because he thought that was better for him. I'd be more annoyed.
But he's not righteous and part of the left-wing brigade. So you have to dislike him immediately. He has to be arrested. There are people. Apparently, there are some people who want to pursue a private prosecution against him. What a waste of time and money.
If you can say you broke the rules, fine. I'm more annoyed about.
The police already said they weren't going to pursue it. They said, we're not going to apply this retrospectively. So let's move on.
Yeah,
let us.
And the mob was outside his house. The newspapers were running with it. Social media was awash with it. I'm not bothered about that. I'm more annoyed about people who have not stopped having house parties and social gatherings. And things like that, because it does transmit within the home more than anywhere else. Them kind of people are the people that annoy me more than anything else. Now, given how outraged we were about one man, and we spoke about him as though he practically tried to kill each of our grandmas personally, that's the level of ire we reserved for him. And then hundreds of thousands of people, or however many, organise in the street with no social distancing whatsoever in the name of Black Lives Matter. And we're told to shut up, don't be a racist, because this is okay. If you break the rules for the right reasons, which that's a whole can of worms that I'm going to have to get into on this podcast as well. If you break the rules for the virtuous left-wing reasons, it's perfectly fine and the rules don't matter anymore. And this didn't come just from the chattering classes on Twitter and elsewhere. It came from politicians. It came from journalists.
It did. Yeah, I saw it was. So Dawn Butler, the Labour MP, last month or so ago, she was claiming that Boris Johnson intending to relax the lockdown was quote unquote sending people out to catch the virus, and then a fellow MP, tweeted. I can't remember who it was now, but they said, they were worried whether the London protests might lead to a second corona spike. And, she just tweeted, don't you dare. Yeah. Don't even go there.
Don't you dare.
Why not? Well, why not? Is Corona a supporter of Black Lives Matter?
Either that lockdown science that you have been zealot-like pushing down everyone's throat and shaming anyone who's deviated it from the merest amount. For months you've been shoving that down people's throats, and all of a sudden it doesn't count and it's not valid because we agree with the reasons people are flouting it. It doesn't wash. You don't get away with it. And there's been a double standard when it comes to the policing as well. The police have now... to be fair, they've got no hope of policing that many people on the streets. We have lost the streets to people like that, to Antifa, to BLM, even to, far right protests. The police can't do everything. They can't get everyone off the street. But there was no efforts to. And to see them kneeling to these people as well. Oh, well, we're going to have to get into it, aren't we? We're going to have to talk about it. Yes, I suppose we should get the easy part out of the way, because like I said at the start of the show, it makes no sense to talk about things where we're all in agreement. And one of the things we were all in agreement with was that the death of George Floyd was just unacceptable on every single level. It was one of the most horrendous things I have witnessed on video. I watched it once. I mean, that man had a knee on his neck for nearly 9 minutes and called out to his mum was one of the last things he did. And I hear that that's quite common if you're afraid, as a man especially. Like, apparently army veterans will say when they've lost their friends, a lot of their last acts and words are to call out for their mum. It's just some blind primal fear. And just to see that is absolutely devastating. And thankfully, the people responsible have been charged. Justice will be done. I'm sure this will lead to some sort of police reform where we do some proper
they're
accounting.
already calling for defunding the police in
that's a different statement. So the thing about this is, it wasn't even a left versus right issue. The Democrats said that is disgraceful and something should be done. It's murder. I said it was murder straight away. And the Republicans even said, I mean, it was disgusting, it was disgraceful, there are no excuses. They were both united in their revulsion at this inhumane, deadly act. So we were all on the same page. We were all there. And, I mean, there was some people obviously bringing up George Floyd's criminal background.
And I mean, I know that he had a background.
It wasn't
background. He was convicted of 8 crimes. I mean, at first I thought, oh wow, okay, so is it criminal? Is he? But after he was released from prison, he did change himself. He worked with other young offenders, and he really wanted to turn his life around. So I think it's fair to say that this was somebody who had a very troubled background, had a bit of a past, and wanted to do something more productive with his life and wanted to be a productive member of his community. And, well,
I mean, once a group of grown men have got you restrained on the floor, what you have done previously is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is what happens from there anyway.
And I'm sure, if as a police officer, you would have to be trained how to restrain somebody safely as well. But, this is America, and some of the stuff that you hear about the police over there is just absolutely shocking. I mean, in Minneapolis, their police academy trains young officers for just 16 weeks before they're assigned weapons, and they're sent out onto the streets as rookie police officers.
Some of the videos I've seen of the police. Now, I will preface this by saying I am generally pro-police. I am of the view that if you abide by the law and comply, the overwhelming probability is you will be okay. And that's not just an anecdote. The statistics bear this out also. Now, that can be true, as well as the fact that a significant number of police are terrible at their jobs and demonstrate it often. And we have to say we're incredibly lucky now that every single one of us is a walking documentary filmmaker, because we catch them in the act now. They can't tell one story afterwards.
This case was different as well, because it was caught on camera.
I mean, I don't agree with the protest, obviously, and the rioting and the looting, but some of the things I've seen happen on video to peaceful protesters has been unbelievable. I know this is coming from someone in a UK culture. We don't have guns, so that changes the game slightly. There's a different level of confrontation in America when you have a gun and a significant number of the population are armed. That changes the dynamic significantly. But I have seen some inexcusable things from the police that just escalate tensions and escalate the situation needlessly. I've seen, flash grenades fired into peaceful protesters' face. Some guy lost an eye that I saw. I've seen cars drive into crowds. I've seen just absolute over-the-top acts of violence against protesters, things like that. That is unacceptable. I don't care how pro-police you are. You have to get rid of those people from your police force. You have to point the finger at them and say it's inexcusable. But I tend to think that most people are on the same page about this, so it might be worth talking about the points where we differ. And I disagree fundamentally with not only the claims of Black Lives Matter, but the actions and the solutions that they propose.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of parallels being made between us and America. Because America's an intellectual and cultural powerhouse. And it's basically like whatever happens in America, you're sure to hear about it here, and it will happen here as well. They fart, we smell it here.
Yeah.
And it says one...
I usually go with when America sneezes, we catch a cold, but I think I like your version better.
Farts better because this stinks, it really does. And it was one writer I heard saying, it's not a parallel as such, but rather an echo, because a lot of people will try and, claim that it's the same. It's not. Our police aren't armed. They don't have guns. The legacy of slavery here is not the same.
Yeah.
We're not as obsessed with race as they are. So according to the charity Inquest, they said there were about 1,741 deaths in police custody since 1990.
This is the UK, yeah?
This is the UK. That's since 1990.
Yeah, you have to try very hard to die in police custody.
Yeah, it's
almost a challenge.
Higher. Exactly, and in America, it's a lot higher. I think it was 1,000 in just 1 year alone, and they've got because they're a federal country, they don't have standard rules for police officer. So training there can range from as few as like 10 or 16 weeks to 36 weeks. Whereas in other countries, especially in Europe, it requires years of education. In Norway and Finland, for example, they have to attend 3-year police universities. And there as well, trust is such a big factor. 90% of people in Finland trust their police officers.
Yeah.
I don't know what the numbers are in America, but I'm guessing it's going to be a lot lower. And when you have such, mistrust in your police force, that is a sign that things have to change. And, over there as well, there are probably officers there who, not all of them, but some who probably don't want the burden of training the new police officers. Then you have the aging officers who probably haven't had enough training or haven't had recent training, which means young police officers don't get enough experience. And then you have, the bad police officers who get stuck with an assignment, and they're the ones you will often hear about. You won't really hear about the good police officers. It's always going to be the ones who, like the one in the George Floyd case. And there's been a lot of talk about whether the police force should be defunded. I don't agree with that, but I think there has to be some sort of reform. And I read this really interesting article where they were saying that actually abolishing the police force has been done before. So like in Georgia, they did it because they felt that the police force was way too corrupt and they just couldn't reform it. So they started from scratch. And they did the same thing actually in Camden, New Jersey. So they were having a rising rate of homicides. And without any resources to hire more police officers, they just thought, right, fuck it, we're going to start from scratch. So in 2013, they laid off more than 250 police officers and they rehired police officers, and they were trained to focus more on community policing and de-escalations, and more importantly, using guns and handcuffs as a last resort.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously you get, we've seen cases of trigger-happy police officers. These ones are trained specifically, in de-escalation. Guns there as a last resort. And now violent crime apparently has fallen by 42%.
Yeah.
So something must be working there. So I don't know, I don't know if that's what people in Minneapolis mean by defunding the police, whether they want to start from scratch or if it's more of an anarchist kind of thing. Because if you read into the Black Lives Matter movement, specifically the UK branch, they want to dismantle capitalism.
Yeah.
They say climate change is racist because why wouldn't it be? Abolish prisons, get rid of borders, abolish the police. How is that going to benefit anyone? You're going to have so much fucking chaos. How is that going to benefit any black people, for crying out loud?
So my view on this is, say if I was some sneaky, very smart, this is probably an oxymoron, but imagine I was some really smart white supremacist. Sneaky.
You're not?
Yeah. No, I'm just a really thick one. But imagine like I'm really sneaky, quite smart and devious, and I wanted black people to face hardship and their material life not to improve and be high risk of victims of violent crime. I'd support everything BLM were doing right now. I would really lean into it as a white supremacist. I would champion that cause left, right and centre, or at the very least I'd stay quiet and let them get on with it rather than criticise them, which is what I'm doing, because I think what they are doing, what they claim, and the misinformation, the false narratives they are putting out there is harming black people. It's certainly not going to help the material lives of black people by firstly propagating this narrative that you are a walking target for the police just because of the colour of your skin. Rather, you are a dead man walking. I've heard this phrase. The police are basically lynching black people because they are black, and this is not borne out by the data on any level whatsoever. And so there's this false narrative about police shootings. I mean, the whole thing was born out of the Michael Brown case. The hands up, don't shoot. Yeah. That was propagated to us as Michael Brown's last words as he was shot in the back running away from a police officer. Turns out, absolute bollocks. He tried to wrestle the police officer's gun from him while the police officer was inside his vehicle, sat down, and the police officer returned fire. Now, you can argue all day about whether that's an appropriate response from the police, but the idea that he shot an unarmed black man in the back as he was running away is just an absolute nonsense. So if we keep spreading these false narratives, do you think that's going to help race relations anywhere? Do you think that's going to... I mean, we can see the data. We can see what's true versus what's being said. And
absolutely.
I'm very pleased to see... I mean, this is another mistake the left makes, and we'll probably get onto this with other individuals later, but they make the mistake of thinking there is something called the black voice or the Muslim voice.
Well, there was Black Voice, wasn't there? Wasn't that a newspaper? Or was it
Possibly.
Just The Voice?
They make but they make the mistake of thinking, well, this is what the black voice thinks. The black voice doesn't think anything. The black voice is comprised of autonomous individuals with varying politics and beliefs and worldviews and experiences and socioeconomic statuses and family dynamics, and every other conceivable metric you can think of is represented in the quote-unquote black community. And we're seeing lots of black people step forward now and saying, actually, BLM doesn't speak for me. As a matter of fact, I think BLM's doing a lot of harm for people like me. And the treatment those kind of people are getting from the left is absolutely astonishing and very telling. Yeah,
so, we often hear about statistics and how, black communities do worse than whites, but it's actually more nuanced than that. There are certain areas where they do better, and there are certain areas where, there's a lot to be improved upon. So, for example, black children now apparently slightly outperform white ones in the government's progressive school measures.
Yeah.
Young black people are more likely to go to university than the whites, 41% to 31%. Only 9% go to elite Russell Group universities compared to 12% of whites. But, it's not too bad. We're getting there. 9% compared to 12%.
What sort of systemic racism would allow that to happen?
Exactly. And, black people are well represented at the top in sport, for example, music, the arts. But they are underrepresented in business and academia.
Yeah.
And, when it comes to the FTSE 100 companies, just not even 1% of the top 20 executives are black. So, how about we do something to address that? I don't see what toppling a statue is going to do. Fair enough if there's a statue of somebody, like Edward Colston, who benefited from the slave trade and, made money off that, fine. I know there was a debate going on with that, and the city thought, let's have a plaque next to, on the statue to explain properly what he did, what his legacy was. Maybe put the statue in a museum somewhere and, have a whole section dedicated to maybe the slave trade and what happened with that. So I don't see what toppling the statue is going to achieve. It's not going to get more black people on the board of FTSE 100 companies. And okay, fine. There's also the fact that there is still a substantial minority of the black population stuck to the bottom of British society, as David Goodhart was saying in his article. He said 14% of them live in household with persistent low income.
Yeah,
and that's something we really, really should address. They're more likely because they're more likely to live in public housing in inner city London or big cities. Their lives are probably going to be, the life expectation will be shorter, more violent, poorer. There's something we can do to actually address that. What can we do to improve lives of people living in those areas and from those communities? Can we provide better housing? What can we do about their health? Violence as well. Young black kids are probably more likely to be stabbed by another black child. And, and then because we've had cuts to policing as well, there's not enough police officers on the streets. Although there are now, because they're probably checking to see if we're all wearing our masks. But we can do something to address those problems. I'm sure we can.
These are amazing issues you just brought up, and they are real issues, consequential issues that may have solutions, but we can't even get around to talking about them, aka helping these people in real ways, because everybody just shouts racist. Oh, there's wealth inequality, must be racism. Oh, there's a lower life expectancy in these communities, must be racism. People in the black ethnic minority community are getting dying of coronavirus more than anyone else. The virus must be racist. I have heard somebody insinuate that they are less likely to be treated because the NHS is racist, which we were just celebrating the other week as a bastion of immigration.
Hang on. Yeah, exactly. So you're telling me an institution that's dominated by immigrants is going to be racist towards immigrants or black people? This is
really, really... this coronavirus thing... Sorry, go ahead.
Who was it? I read somebody say this... I don't know if it was Janice Turner from The Times, but it was a phrase that kind of summed up this whole thing. These protests, they've set off a tsunami of civil virtue signalling, which has drowned out all the other issues.
Yes.
I think that sums it up perfectly. It's all become about virtue signalling. Let's cancel Gone with the Wind because it presents a rosy picture of slavery. Well, it was written in 1936 when people... I'm sorry to have to break this to you all out there, but people had really bad views back then.
Yeah.
They were
and the internet connection was really slow.
It was. People had views like that back in those days. We're living in supposedly more enlightened times where we're more tolerant now. Oh, well, we're supposed to be, although I'm seeing more intolerant now. We're living in more enlightened times where we accept that there are gay people, lesbians. We don't give a shit about the colour of someone's skin. If your child comes home with a partner of a different skin colour, your parents won't really mind it as much as they would have done 50 years ago.
Has progressed and progressed and progressed. It's one of the biggest possible measures of a racist society you can have. Are you happy to start a family with somebody of a different skin colour? And we're very progressive on that score, thankfully. But this idea that, first of all, the coronavirus, the biggest at-risk category is the elderly. That's how it seems to work. Now, the data does suggest that people of ethnic backgrounds are dying at a disproportionate rate as well. Now,
Yeah,
racism...
but we don't know why that is.
Well, we do.
don't know why that is.
We kind of do, because obviously racism doesn't explain it, but comorbidities does, which means that there are other pre-existing conditions that are higher in these communities. Type 2 diabetes is one of them. People mention the fact that certain communities are more likely to have a multi-generational household than not.
Yeah, but don't forget when the numbers were high, this was before people were looking into why this was, and straight away the response was, oh, well, it's got to be racism.
Yeah.
It has to be racism.
But,
we're just trying to whittle down the brown folk in this country, so let's kill them all with corona.
But let's all get in the street for Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter so much. Let's kill them all by gathering and passing on the coronavirus.
That's the point. Commentators have pointed out, this is a disease that is, I think it might have been Trevor Phillips, this is a disease that's disproportionately killing more black and minority ethnic people, and yet these are the people who are going out on the streets to protest. I mean, fair enough, they're a lot younger, they're probably less likely to catch it or less likely to die, but still.
I mean, so these are avoidable deaths then, because it's comorbidities, that's the key. And in these communities, type 2 diabetes is higher than in other communities. Respiratory problems, I think, you'll have to look this up, don't take my word on it. So these are preventable deaths, and that is tragic to me, that people are dying at a disproportionate rate for preventable reasons. Now, there are ways you can address this. There's nothing the government can mandate to people in these communities. It comes down to healthier lifestyles, doesn't it? Exercise, diet, on average. So why is it that certain communities are not getting the education, perhaps, or the message, or or for whatever reason are not getting the message that a healthier lifestyle would reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes, obesity, things like that is leading to higher rates? That can be addressed. Government money government money can be spent in that area. We can do something about it. We should be talking about it and helping people like this.
But we're speaking, slight tangent, but speaking about preventable deaths and problems like obesity. Boris Johnson, because he had coronavirus, and
he's the peak of health, isn't he?
I mean, he's obese.
Just as an aside, obese. I think Jeremy Corbyn would knock him out in a fist fight. I think I would just...
Boris would bounce him off his bed.
I think Boris would, actually, to be fair, Boris would fight dirty, wedgie him.
Boris would fight, but you know what? Corbyn is a vegan, so
he'd
lose.
How old is he? He's 80 something, Jeremy Corbyn. He looks in far better condition. Boris Johnson looks like...
my money is still on Boris.
Yeah, to be fair, I was thinking it through in my head. I think he'd have him. But he looks healthier. Boris is in his 50s and he looks like he's on death's door before he had the coronavirus.
He looks awful.
He's a very unhealthy man.
His hair's always a mess, but it looks even worse.
Yeah.
And he wants the nation to start looking after itself, the rise of the nanny state now. And this is a Conservative government, which is quite shocking as well. So he wants the nation to be healthy. Meanwhile, gyms are still closed, leisure centres are still closed. You can't really catch corona in a swimming pool because chlorine apparently does kill it, but swimming pools are closed. But hey, let's open pubs and the cinema where you can just sit for 2 hours and drink. Yeah, that's really going to solve obesity, Boris. But anyway, moving on. But you're right. There are communities, let's say Asian or Black communities, where there are problems, a higher prevalence of diabetes, type 2 diabetes particularly, which is preventable. And you can do certain things to reverse it as such. And you can't really get rid of it, but you can, they say you can put yourself into remission if you lose enough weight.
Yeah, you can uninstall the type 2 diabetes app on your operating system if you take the right steps.
Press reset Windows. So those are the things that you can do. So where can we use where can we divert funding to? We've got this pot of money. What can we do in order to improve people's health? Let's solve it on diabetes or something.
I mean, there is a lot of over-reliance on the state in terms of, we do sometimes look at the state in terms of a babysitter to tell us what to do, and sometimes you've got to help yourself.
Guidance.
Yeah, you need some guidance.
You need guidance. You need someone to lead, because you need that authority.
I don't think people know much about nutrition in general, and I apply that to medical professionals. Your GP, some of the advice they give on diet is really not helpful.
Some of them are really fat. Like most of my doctors are fat.
Yeah. I mean, they work high-pressure jobs. They have to eat when they can. They're not the healthiest people themselves. But I think there's also this misconception that it's very expensive to have a healthy diet. This idea of the organic produce and this middle-class lifestyle. And it isn't. If you know what to look for and what you can pick up, you can get a bag of lentils for next to nothing.
Yeah, my mum, she's cooking for the whole family. If she's cooking, say a curry for us all, she can just get, as you said, a bag of lentils, which are dirt cheap. Although Asian shops did hike up their prices,
son of a bitch,
at the beginning of lockdown. I know, bastards.
I bet they cycle as well.
First they came for our lentils, but yeah. So you can get a bag of lentils and you can cook an amazing curry with that. Bag of potatoes as well. Okay, well that's carbs, so that's cancelled. You can, if you know what you're looking for, if you can cook a meal from scratch. I used to think that, maybe it is expensive getting all these things from scratch, but not necessarily. Going to like Aldi or somewhere, fruit's really cheap. So are vegetables. Actually, the fruit is better in Aldi as well. So if you can get cheap fruit, cheap vegetables, then you can do so much with that, and other things you can buy as well. But anyway, going back to the subject before, we were talking about racism, structural racism. We know racism is a problem, but I think we've got to that point where for most people, it's not an everyday occurrence. You're not going to...
Yeah, I only go doing my racism at weekends now, which is an improvement.
Yeah, so... it's not like, back in the 50s and 60s where, you'd have signs saying no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, signs outside of pubs and clubs until the Race Relations Act that forbid it. But now, we're not just dealing with out-and-out racism, because, let's forget, those cases are not as high in numbers. No, we have to deal with microaggressions. I'm going to read you an extract from an article.
Oh, please do.
I'm going to read you an extract from an article I read. From telling a new female worker that she looks like a student to asking a black colleague about her natural hair, microaggressions often exist in the workplace too. And they can make a workplace feel uncomfortable, unsafe, and toxic. Here's another example of a... microaggression. The way you've overcome your disability is so inspiring. Exactly. What the fuck is that supposed to be? I'm sorry. Telling someone they look like a student, I don't see how that's microaggression, or how do you feel uncomfortable at being told that you look like a student? I get often asked if I've got my student card when I go because I look young and hot, okay? Whatever. Take it as a compliment. I got asked for ID. I didn't burst out crying and say, oh, you're making me feel so unsafe.
Well, 2 quick points. First, now I've heard your reading voice, you have to do the entire podcast like that. Secondly, is it not incredibly telling that the biggest racist issues of our day pertain to past indiscretions and past atrocities, aka slavery, and such subtle acts of racism that they can't be detected unless you've got the Hubble telescope of grievance at your disposal, like microaggressions and comments about hair. And I saw something the other day. Somebody claiming that, I can't remember what this is from. Oh, it might bring us on to Munira Mirza, actually. Was it her clip where she was saying somebody considered the act of calling a black person articulate a racist microaggression?
Yes, that was it. I was just about to say that. Yeah. She's like, but why is that automatically racist? What if you actually were articulate? Because the thing is, there are a lot of people out there who aren't articulate, and sometimes that's no fault of their own. They just they can't express themselves well in words. Maybe they can write better. They're not articulate, but sometimes you get the gist of what they're saying. Whereas there are some people who just have a fantastic way of words. Oh, but that's racist now. I don't get how certain things are microaggression. Oh, here's another one. where are you from? I get asked that all the time because I live in London and I have a fucking northern accent.
Yeah.
It will get picked up straight away. But, this whole, where are you from? I don't see the problem with that because, on the one hand, we're saying we should be proud of our roots. We should be proud of, we're Asian background, Asian heritage. We should be proud of it. But then when someone asks us where we're from, oh, why are you asking me? I'm British. Okay, fine. Maybe they should have said, oh, where's your family originally from? Fine. But I don't see how that's a big deal. If you're proud of your roots and, you can't exactly, if you're Asian, if you have beige or brown skin, you can't really hide it. Of course you're going to ask where your family's from. And usually it's mostly other brown people who ask me that. Very rarely get asked that by white people where I'm from. It's other BAME people or immigrants who ask me, oh, where are you from? When I've been on holiday and they've asked me where I'm from and I said, oh, England. No, really.
Where are you really from?
Because they don't accept me as British, but British people here accept me as British.
Yeah, I mean,
except you.
Two scenarios. I mean, first of all, if they're asking you where you're from, they're just showing interest in you, usually, which is fairly positive.
What's wrong with that?
If they're asking you whilst looking down the barrel of a shotgun, that could be an issue. Yeah, I mean, my podcast is international, and I travel and I speak to people all the time from different countries, and they always ask me where I'm from. Are you from? And the first thing is obviously, see, how often does this happen to you? Whenever you are speaking to somebody that's not from the UK and you tell them that you're from England, the first thing they'll say is, "Oh, London." Because they think London's the default. Everyone's from London. Now, if I was a victimhood junkie, I could pretend that was somehow discriminatory. Why are they erasing my existence as a northerner by assuming I'm from London, as if I give a shit?
You should be triggered.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just this daft obsession now, and I'm sure you've noticed that every single thing in our news cycle now is geared to skin colour. How can we make this issue, this story, this product, this transgression, whatever it is, how can we make it about skin colour? The weather's racist at the minute. The countryside's racist at the minute. Fucking chess is racist at the minute. And
do you know what's so funny? I was playing chess with a friend and I joked that, why does white go first? Isn't that racist? And I thought, I'm just taking the piss. And then I heard this and I thought, whoa.
And I don't know if you've noticed as well, and the media is culpable in this, but every time something bad happens to an ethnic minority, whether the police shoot them, whether the police misidentify them, whether they die in detention, the ethnicity is always in the headline. Black person dies in custody, this, that. Any other death in custody, any other shooting, anything else that's not an ethnic minority just doesn't tend to get reported at all. And if it does, the skin colour isn't in the headline. And I can't help but think that, all right, the skin colour may be an indicator of racism, which makes it newsworthy. But going with the assumption that it's something to do with race and we have to work backwards from there is not helping anyone, and it's really ratcheting up this tension. Things feel like they're slightly on a knife edge, and I'm terrified at the minute that we're going to get some horrible resurgence of white nationalism, because we're constantly being told whiteness is a problem. We're constantly being told this country's a racist hellhole. We're constantly being told to shut up because your voice doesn't matter because you're privileged. You're just going to get a bunch of people who don't give a shit about any of that feeling threatened, and they're going to start doing and saying stupid shit again. And these polar extremes feed off each other and ruin the harmony for normal, nice, decent people who don't give a shit about skin colour. They want to wake up in the morning, they want to earn some money, they want to see the kids, they want to go on holiday, they want to watch a nice film, maybe go for a walk, get drunk every now and then, and just have a nice, normal life where they mix with people of different ethnicities and backgrounds and could not give a shit about statues and police shootings in the States and all this kind of stuff that's taken everyone's attention now to where we're all starting to have to think about our skin colour. Do you know what I mean? Like, you do not want to start making people obsess about their skin colour, because nothing good comes from that environment whatsoever. It never has.
I think that also this, this idea of victimhood is quite interesting as well, because It's a piece that I read, and they were saying, you know, it was discussing what impact it has on people's psychology if you constantly raise themselves to think of themselves as victims first. And they gave an example of the opposite, and that was of the Jewish people, you know, particularly after the Holocaust, because this was a community that had just been through one of the most horrific things throughout history. You know, they were targeted just for being Jewish. And instead of seeing themselves as perpetual victims, they came out of that very, very strong. And, you know, they found this sense of inner strength and used that to their advantage. How can they bandy together and use their strength to come out of this? Rather than, okay, they acknowledged the horrors, but they didn't see themselves as perpetual victims. And I think that's really important. I think there's a lesson that we can all learn from that. I mean, sometimes, I guess maybe it depends on each individual as well. If you've actually been through something, you know, it's gonna affect you in a way maybe it won't for somebody else. You know, we can both be attacked, and we might have very different reactions to that. And you know what's funny? That all these companies are coming on board supporting Black Lives Matter, and you think, they want to abolish capitalism, you thick fuck. You know, your company would be gone if it were up to them.
Capitalism has been a gift. No environment hasn't been improved by a healthy dose of capitalism. It's a great emancipator in many ways. It's not always, obviously, you know, there are problems, there's regulations, there are monopolies, there are people who abuse it, they are bastards, but it's the worst system except for all the others. That's how it works with capitalism. If we've got a better system, let me know what it is and where it's worked. We haven't.
I thought it was communism. You know, you know, they did really well in Venezuela, by the way, and Cuba.
Well, the leaders and the people who started Black Lives Matter have openly come out and declared themselves trained Marxists. We see them now in Black Lives Matter UK. Actually, I've got two issues I want to run through very quickly. So the BLM UK Twitter account has played its hand and come out against Israel and propagated the anti-Semitic trope that we're not allowed to criticise the state of Israel in the UK. We've been gagged. Oh, by who? I wonder what they're trying to say there, which is just not true. The other day, Black Lives Matter LA had two pieces of information, and they were that two black men had been found hanged by the neck outdoors from trees, was the report.
I saw that.
That's the information we had. They openly and outright referred to them as racist lynchings. That's Black Lives Matter LA branch blue tick Twitter account, hundreds of thousands of followers, and they told them that black people are being lynched, hanged from trees in 2020 America. And they told them that based on the fact that we have two bodies. And at the time, the police, it was known, had said, has all the hallmarks of a suicide. One of the victims had previous suicide attempt marks on them. There was no sign of another struggle. And they have actually found CCTV footage of one of them hanging themselves. They are suicides. It would be beyond the realm of most levels of probability for them to be actual lynchings and not be some telling marks or some obvious indications off the bat. But they were happy to use them to... This is another example of where these real issues, in this case male suicide skyrocketing, what we could really address and talk about mental health issues, talk about the social economic status that can lead to increased suicide rates. I think one of the men was homeless. There are all these real social welfare issues we could talk about that would improve the material lives of these black men that we are not talking about. And now that these groups are starting to accept that there was no foul play involved, they are done with this issue. They are done with these two men. These black lives don't matter. It's bullshit. They do not matter to these people. They only matter as far as they can use them as gambits to propagate their far left nonsense.
And this is what the far left does. You know, which we'll get into in a second. They really want to see ethnic minorities succeed, but when they're the wrong type, they don't like that. And that actually is a form of racism, because you're saying you can only be acceptable if you fit our view of what an Asian person is or a black man is. So, which leads very nicely into Munira Mirza.
Well, I would just like to say I'm very glad that BLM have annoyed the Jews, because it is nice to see the mask slip and them revealing themselves for the far left lunatics that they are.
But this is why I find, maybe I'm exaggerating here, but this is why I fear that the far left is more dangerous than the far right, because whatever their demands are, our media and some of our politicians will heed their warnings and their advice and whatever they say, and they will give in to some of their demands. I mean, look at the people who were taking the knee in honour of George Floyd, or in support of Black Lives Matter. And whereas when you have the far right, nobody really makes excuses for them. They're probably condemned and they're shamed as well for their views. Whereas with the far left, the far left kind of, in a way, they set the tone. They set the tone with what will happen next. If you remember, I said earlier that, to quote someone, this has set off a tsunami of civil virtue signalling, which has drowned out all the other issues. This is what's happened with all these far leftists in charge now and running you're setting the tone, basically. It's drowned out all these other issues that we've got going on, and it means we have to kind of move towards them. They're not being told to move a bit further towards the centre and come to some sort of common ground. We're having to move further out left, and it's very reminiscent of, what was it, Mao's culture wars, trying to delete history. I mean, for fuck's sake, how far are we going to go with this?
If you give them an inch and they take a mile, it doesn't end. That's why I'm sick of people trying to capitulate and trying to give them what, if they think, if I just give them a little bit of what they want, if I apologise, if I bend the knee, if I agree a statue will come down, that'll be the end of it. And it won't. They will take it further and further and further, which they have been doing.
I don't get why people didn't think that, like, oh yeah, we can just get rid of one statue and then, hey, presto, the issue.
They don't want justice. They want to crush you. And I will not. I'm not even going to kneel for the fucking Queen. So there's no way I'm kneeling for a far left Marxist organisation that propagates lies and actually gets people killed. Now, that is to be completely separated from the notion that Black Lives Matter. Why would you even need to say that? Of course, Black Lives Matter. That's a ridiculous thing not to agree with. And anyone who doesn't agree with that sentiment is my enemy, right? But we've got to separate Black Lives Matter, the sentiment, from Black Lives Matter, the organisation. Two things about the far left and far right issue. The far left are extreme idiots, the far right are extreme idiots. We accept that. The difference is the far left get a seat at the table and the far right don't. And by that I mean the far left are represented in government, the far right are not. The far left run academia. The far left is the dominant force in a lot of our media, a lot of our institutions, now a lot of our corporations, as we're seeing. It's difficult to know whether or not these companies are sincere or they're just trying to jump on bandwagons for profits.
And then look at the, that man from Burnley who was in charge
White Lives
of the
Matter.
White Lives Matter.
That was
side.
brilliant.
And then he was instantly, cancelled.
He's a genius.
He's like, oh,
he's a genius.
Is he the one? Did he have a picture taken with Tommy Robinson?
So he's cancelled for that, obviously. Now, I don't know the first thing about this guy. I forgot his name. It might be Jake.
I think he was sacked from work, wasn't he?
He was. Now, this guy might be a scumbag. This guy might be a knuckle-dragging Neanderthal.
He's from Burnley.
Yeah, so confirmed then, if he's from Burnley. Right? Now, what he did was a remarkable piece of trolling, which really demonstrated something, and it's up there with a few other attempts. I don't know if you saw a while back, somebody on college campuses put up a sign saying it's okay to be white. Now, that's true. That is true.
I mean, it's not okay.
That's factual. But that's the problem. People actually don't. They're so aggressive and triggered by that they have to pretend it's a white supremacist provocation. That's how far the window's been shifted on the discourse, that to say it's okay to be white is twisted as some sort of provocation, some white supremacist provocation, when it isn't. And the only reason they're so angry about it is because actually a lot of them don't think it's okay to be white. That's the first thing. I don't know if you saw that other remarkable piece of trolling a while back where somebody put up a sign saying Islam is right about women. So then people, the left, the liberals lost their shit. They couldn't decide whether it was misogynistic, whether or not it was Islamophobic. Then they were stuck in between a rock and a hard place by having to disagree with Islam, which is amazing. They have to either say actually Islam is right about women, or they have to admit that Islam has some rather unfavourable practices and attitudes towards women. That was remarkable. And what this guy did is, well, all the footballers were wearing Black Lives Matter on their shirts and taking the knee and before the mat. He hired a plane to fly over the stadium with a flag saying White Lives Matter Burnley. And I think we'd have to agree that white lives do matter.
No, they don't.
But again, this was roundly condemned as a racist provocation. The club came out staunchly against the idea that white lives matter. The police announced that they would be investigating. They were also appalled by the suggestion that white lives matter. So this is the double standard. If we are going to play the game of racial identity politics, which, by the way, I'm against. I don't want any flags with that kind of sentiment being flown anywhere. But if we were all going to play this game now, and this is the system we're opting into, get used to these reactions. You've created this. You have asked for this. You created the situation that did not exist several years ago and does not need to exist now because you are racializing anything and everything at every opportunity. All lives matter, Iram. There, and I said it. All lives matter.
White lives don't matter.
Yeah, white lives actually don't matter, to be fair. Yeah, so he I mean, it's worth pointing out that he was fired, publicly condemned, had death threats, people trying to dox him because he said, kill the blacks. Oh, no, it wasn't kill the blacks. He said, white lives matter. So clearly...
Oh, he's right up there with Hitler as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and there were people trying to argue it with me, like it's not what he said, it's what he thinks. You know, there are people really leaning heavily into thought crime.
As opposed to a Cambridge professor who actually said white lives don't matter.
White lives don't, but that's not what she meant.
But that's not what she meant, but hey, she gets a promotion anyway. Don't want to mention
this is dangerous games. I will say, I have no desire, I have no appetite, and I find it a little bit dull to lean into race-based identity politics. I don't care. I hate white nationalists, and I hate people who are black identitarians. I just think if you're going to make that your driving force in life and your inspiration for the way you live and act and your character, you can just fuck off. I'm not interested, and that's a better world for everyone. But if you're going to play that game and you're going to favour one over the other, you're going to get a reaction, and it's not going to be pretty. And I am seriously worried about where this could progress to. I mean, we're already seeing instances of violence and looting and vandalism and people applauding it all the way. And it's just, we need the adults to take charge of the classroom now, I think.
Oh, I think the adults are just as fucking bad. So, we're screwed.
So, I was thinking, we can either do one more topic or we can see what questions we have.
Well, should we mention the Reading?
Oh, yeah. Oh, see, that we've had fucking a confirmed terrorist attack, another one which is probably not being treated as terrorism.
We've probably forgotten about it.
And so here's the thing: in the midst of weeks of protests with people shouting "Black Lives Matter" and screaming it from the rafters everywhere, I put on my VR headset the other day to go to the Amazon Prime virtual cinema to get away from it, because when I've got my VR headset on, I watch a film, I can't check my phone for a start, I don't get distracted, I can just have a cinematic experience and just get away from all the identity politics. First thing I fucking see when I log into Amazon Prime is they've created a number of Black Lives Matter films for me. Spotify playlist. Everywhere you could not escape it. So whilst we're shouting and screaming about the importance of black lives, 3 white lives get murdered in a park in Reading.
And they were gay as well.
Gay, from a knife-wielding attacker shouting Allahu Akbar, which has just been confirmed by The Telegraph, apparently, while we've been recording. And that jumped in the news cycle and dropped out the news cycle to the point where even Pink News, who was supposed to, or Stonewall, who was supposed to represent the gay voice in this country, 3 gay men stabbed and killed in a Reading Park by an Islamic fascist.
This was, so this was last
but they're running
Saturday, so not the Saturday gone, the one before.
It's out the news cycle, it's dead, but they're running, these LGBT organisations are running articles about how we can't let this incident increase Islamophobic hate. Their chief concern when an Islamic fascist kills 3 gay people is not the potential homophobic sentiment coming from that ideology that's on the increase and fairly frequent nowadays. If it's not happening, it's being foiled left, right and centre. That's not their concern. Their concern is how this might be bad for Muslims who are not being stabbed to death in parks in the UK, thankfully.
So basically, just over a week ago, these protests are going on and we're still in lockdown, and then all of a sudden there's this attack on 3 men in Reading, and we can't really say too much about it because the man, Saad Lahiri, he's now been arrested. He was initially arrested on suspicion of murder and then rearrested under the Terrorism Act. This was a young man from Libya, claimed asylum, given leave to remain in 2018. And then a close member of his family told the BBC that he left Libya to escape the violence there, suffered from PTSD from the civil war, and that he had long-standing mental health problems exacerbated by the coronavirus lockdown. And he was on MI5's radar last year, someone who could travel overseas, possibly for terrorism purposes, but wasn't deemed an immediate risk. And that's happened. We've seen that before, haven't we? Last year we even had those terrorist attacks in Streatham and then London Bridge. And then again we had another one. We had Glasgow on Friday. 6 people stabbed. I think they were asylum seekers. The man himself, Badruddin Abdullah Adam, he was an asylum seeker himself. Apparently he was miserable, suffered from mental issues, health problems.
He was shot dead by the police, wasn't he?
He was shot.
Which means we can say whatever we want about that cunt. That's fine. Yeah, we can lay into him. He's not going to sue us for defamation. There's no contempt of court here, is there?
Two points I want to make about this. First of all, I've had people talk about mental health issues and what's going to happen during lockdown, and we've seen that happen now. 2 people who are clearly suffering from mental health problems as well, and obviously that doesn't justify what happened, but this is something that people have been warning about. The effects of lockdown and on their mental health. And the other problem I have, the other issue, that I wanted to point out is that we've had a few terrorist attacks, and they're all lone wolf attacks, which are much, much harder to prevent or completely stop. I mean,
you can't say prevent.
Prevent's cancelled. So, but the police force did a wonderful job in limiting the damage that those men could do. There weren't as many deaths. And that's a good thing, that they weren't able to kill as many people as they wanted. But so we've had these attacks, and yet I don't know about you, but I get the feeling that our government and people in general don't really seem to take the threat of terrorism seriously. It's still out there. It's not gone away. And I think people are just being complacent. We're all preoccupied with coronavirus and lockdown and getting the economy back on track.
The rate at which it drops out of our media and public psyche just indicates to me people have accepted it. It is part of life. I know Sadiq Khan obviously unfairly gets misquoted on that sometimes, but this idea of it being part and parcel of modern life, it just feel like people have gone, yeah, and it is still wrapped up in that desire or the protection of yourself not to criticise something that you feel might be a little bit brown, which really irritates me. And this ties into the Glasgow thing, because this was I am pro asylum So I'm very, I'm quite, I know I'm not often proud of being British, but I'm proud of living in a country that says to people, if you need asylum, you can come to us and we will look after you, and we will honour your human rights to a degree that you certainly couldn't have received in your origin country. I'm happy about that. That is a good use of your time as far as I'm concerned. But we just seem to have different standards. So what I saw when this happened, this asylum seeker, from all recorded information we have on them, was very troubled, had mental health issues. I think this was actually raised by a care worker the day before he went on his stabbing spree. But the news angle on it afterwards in Glasgow, when they were doing the reports, were, well, these poor asylum seekers are having a rough time of it. You know, they can't. They're not in the best conditions and getting the best treatment. And they interviewed an asylum seeker, and he was moaning that, you know what, the Wi-Fi is a bit sketchy. It cuts in and out. I can only get...
They had to find that one person.
He literally whinged that his free meals were at specific times. Now, these were 2-hour windows. Once at lunch, once in the evening for your lunch and dinner, or your dinner and tea if you're a proper northern. And he was moaning that if he didn't turn up between in these 2-hour slots, he wouldn't get his food. Well, you fucking turn up then, don't you? If you want your food, your free food that the state is providing for your asylum.
Yeah, it's like if I'm at home, you know, mum's like, come down if you want dinner, if you don't...
Stop, fuck off, yeah. You know, we have dinner, we have times of meals. That's what we do. And a 2-hour time slot each time is not an unreasonable time, and it's not unsociable hours either. So it was this kind of... This victimhood. These people have ostensibly come from war-torn countries, deep hardships, apparently. That's why they're seeking asylum. But... Britain's a bit shit. The Wi-Fi's sketchy, and I don't like the free meal arrangements. So
I mean, to be fair, they're in Glasgow.
Yeah, Glasgow. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. That is pretty inhumane.
Sorry to any of our listeners in Glasgow.
Yeah, so I just think we need to be a bit more staunch. There was this idea propagated a while back about staunch liberalism. We should be compassionate, we should help people, but we shouldn't allow people... Muscular liberalism, that's the one. We shouldn't allow people to take the piss, and we should not treat people differently because of their backgrounds and skin colours and things like that. We should be able to say, fuck off, mate, if they're behaving unreasonably. And we should certainly be able to raise the questions of potential increases in violence or crime or whatever due to mass immigration or increased asylum. Like, I haven't got my mind made up on any of these things, but it should certainly be something we should be able to discuss. And we always take the opposite angle, where we always make anyone perceived to be the other a victim by default, and it's not always true. Some, you know, the victims in this Reading attack were the 3 people trying to enjoy their lives in a park. Before some lunatic who perhaps shouldn't have even been here in the first place stabbed them. And from the reports as well, and this is stuff that's been reported widely, it was due to a single stab wound on each of the victims. Now, that is hard to do unless you know what you're doing. So, for instance, sometimes you will receive reports of stabbing victims. You know, the stabbing victim was stabbed 150 times, and sometimes you're struggling to compute, like, how were they stabbed 150 times? I mean, even just say 50 times. That is an astronomical amount of times to insert a blade into someone in and out, to have 50 stab wounds. The reason that's happening is because that person is still struggling, fighting, moving, and or breathing up until the 50th stab wound or the 150th stab wound, because they weren't fatal. Because it's some people get stabbed sometimes and don't realise they've been stabbed until they walk away. It can be so clean and quick sometimes and not fatal that you don't even notice it. To stab 3 people and kill them each with an individual stab wound should really give you some indication of the viciousness of what occurred.
Well, apparently he... You know, an eyewitness was saying that he did say he wanted to stab people. Could he do that? No.
He asked permission.
You don't. Yeah, you don't go around stabbing people, mate. You know,
yeah. Well, who are we to say?
I mean, that's not how they do it in Glasgow anymore.
Well, yeah, anymore.
You know, and yeah, sorry, we shouldn't make fun of this, but you know, he was. He really, from what I can tell by the eyewitness, he really seemed to have a lot of issues. He was a very, very troubled individual, and he did say he was going to stab people, and alarms were raised, and they didn't take it seriously. So
I think this is the climate that's been created now. There is no way several months ago I would have filtered this thing through the prism of 3 white people were killed. It would just have been 3 people were killed. But now, because the entire country is gripped in Black Lives Matter hysteria, I have to put my hand up and say, did you notice that the 3 white people were just killed in a park and nobody gives a shit about it anymore? And we're still having Black Lives Matter protests because the police, 1 person died in police custody in the UK apparently. I think it might have been the Westminster jihadi attacker, actually, come to think of it, because they include that in the stats.
Oh God.
So it's like, we have to sort of get our priorities straight here. I mean, you can protest all you want all day long about anything you want. More power to you. But if you're going to propagate a false narrative, people are going to have to come to you with facts that challenge your narrative. And this certainly does. So I've had enough of race-based identity politics. Should we do some questions?
Yeah. So there's quite a lot on Black Lives movement, which we've touched upon. It's tardigrades all the way down. I'm thinking that's a reference to something, although I don't
even see that one. I'll have to have a look. I'll check.
How do we get anything moderate and non-ideological to push all the woke out of the common?
Who's that from? Read out the names of the people asking.
It's tardigrades.
Oh, you did. Sorry,
down.
Tardigrades. Right. Okay. Yeah, what the fuck does that? It's tardigrades all the way down. We have probably...
Oh, hang on. This is easier. Their handle is
not that CK. You see, he could have covertly just got us to read out the equivalent of white power forever and we wouldn't know. Do you know what I mean? That's sneaky, that. Tardigrades all the way
I feel
down.
Bombarded and hopeless most of the time. Most of numpties bleeding about power don't really have any, but their voices are amplified all the same. It is true. There's all these like activists who are getting a lot of airtime. And that's a good question. How do we push back against this? I don't know. It's like letting the genie out of the bottle, really. I don't think you can really stop it, can you?
Well, I think we're going to reach some level of herd immunity. We're all... The average person... I alluded to the idea before that most people just want to get up, go to work, earn some money, see their friends, see the wife and kids, have a bit of money in their back pocket for a holiday, watch a film. Their lives are carrying on now. They don't want to get political. They don't want to deal with any of that noise. It's coming to the point now where the noise is being posted through their letterbox and shoved in their face at every turn. You can't go daily life now without the hand of woke or identity politics trying to taint normal, nice, everyday things. And the average person is going to rise up eventually and say, just fuck off, I've had enough. And so many people are getting cancelled now. And when somebody does get cancelled, there's enough people who have been cancelled that come to their aid. Organisations are challenging it. So I think eventually we were all going to have to get cancelled. Not enough. But I think we are in the midst of a pushback, however small, and it is starting. And to go into that idea of privilege, and I alluded to it earlier about this idea that capitulating will not save you. The mob will still get you. Gary Lineker's one of the worst virtue signalers on Twitter ever.
Piers Morgan's
turned into a right Karen. Yeah,
he's done a complete 180. He's like, his son was at the Black Lives Matter protest.
And he
was cheering him on.
Oh my god!
And this is someone who's like, Mr. Lockdown.
He was hysterical about any hint of not following the lockdown rules at the beginning of this. Absolutely hysterical. And now he's congratulating his son for attending an unnecessary protest. But that's by the by. But Gary Lineker, so he made a joke the other day on Twitter. I don't know if you saw it, but all the football players, instead of having their names on the back of their shirts or jersey, if you're that way inclined, they had their surnames replaced with the phrase Black Lives Matter. And Gary Lineker made a little joke, which is quite funny. It's quite innocent, one might think. He made the joke that he's putting money on Black Lives Matter to score first. A gambling joke. You'd normally bet on a player. I'm putting money.
Total.
I'm putting money on Marcus Rashford scoring first. He interchangeable. It's a shit dad joke, but it's innocent. It's benign. it's quite funny in a way.
God, I wonder if he wears dad trainers.
Yeah, without a doubt. Now,
but he does. Ugh.
A few people, you see, this is how you can't please anyone. He's been a staunch cheerleader for Black Lives Matter and all the woke causes you can think of, and they still came for him for that joke. And I say they.
What? But it was a lame joke,
Yeah,
and it wasn't even offensive.
But he wasn't taking the situation seriously enough, Iram. It's not a situation one makes jokes about. Gary Lineker's done nothing wrong, which pains me to say it because he does my head in on Twitter. But this is what I mean. It won't save you. There's always a new test. You can't pass these tests. It's a new religion. There's so many dogmas and contradictions and do's and don'ts on one page that are opposite from do's and don'ts on another page that you're constantly scrambling to figure out what you can say, what you can do, what you can think. And that's basically the structure of any fascist dictatorship you can think of, always keeping you on your toes, always guessing, never quite knowing whether you will be next for the chop, never quite knowing what all the rules are so that you can satisfy them. And that's what this is. So I'm just not playing the game of woke top trumps, which appears to be the norm everywhere you look now.
Another question. Matt B has asked 2 questions, greedy twat.
Matt.
Right. Do you think celebrities of colour talking about their experience of racism, some which seem very flimsy at times, are being genuine? Or is it insensitive to think that they might just be using the current climate to promote their careers? I think it's a bit of both. I think there are some who are just jumping on the bandwagon and saying, yeah, go, Black Lives Matter, woohoo, you know, this is so important because racism is still a thing. I mean, obviously racism still exists, but I think it's unfair to suggest that they haven't experienced any racism because, you know, if you have brown or black skin, then chances are you will have experienced some racism.
Yeah.
So I don't think we should doubt their experience, but I am a bit cynical about some of them.
I'm very cynical about the unfalsifiable claim. So obviously if some black person in the States who happens to be an actor or whatever gives you an account of an instance of racism they've experienced, direct racism, I will say, well, that's terrible, and that counts in the ledger of racism, and that's something we all should oppose. But you will often hear a lot of people who will say, well, look, I'm a black actor and I certainly would have had more opportunities were I not black. Now that's a claim you can't really substantiate, especially when it's coming from people who are already successful and wealthy.
Yeah, I don't like that. Sorry. I mean, I'm not saying that just because you're successful, you're not going to face any problems. But, you know, it's more comfortable to cry in the back of a Bentley or something, isn't it? I think if you're already at the top and you're earning millions and millions of dollars, you really can't complain about how bad you have it. You know, it's like that scene from Friends, isn't it? You know, when Ross has 2 women, he has to choose between 2 women, and Chandler's like, oh no, 2 women are in love with me, you know, my diamond shoes are too tight or something.
Yeah.
It's just it just smacks of...
What I would say is people who live in Hollywood do not live in the real world, and you should not go to them for your moral guidance or social commentary. They do not have a clue what's going on outside of their bubble.
They'll just bend over for their next dollar.
These are people who never hear a different opinion, who are only ever told what they want to hear by people around them, by their publicists, by their agencies, by their producers, by their studios. It's all very nice, lovely. And you see this...
These are people who get their oat milk delivered to them as well.
And you see this with the self-importance they have when they approach a microphone at any awards ceremony ever. It's almost a case of, well, thank God I'm here to deal with the problem of racism and inequality. Thank God I said something.
With them. Try and get an interview with them or something, and, you know, you see how up themselves some of them are. I mean, you get some really nice down-to-earth people, but a lot of them, you know, they will not talk unless their bloody publicist has agreed with it.
Well, I've got a question. So yeah. Omar Diaz has asked so many questions, but can't think of any right now. I just want to shout out on TT Myth. Consider this a shout out. Then he's actually followed up with, actually, your opinions on the whole defunding the BBC thing. Now, I've got a few quick opinions on that. Firstly, I tend to think that the BBC is quite balanced. Now, before everyone shouts and screams at me, there will be people hearing me say that right now who will be 100% adamant that the BBC is a far left liberal love fest, and there will be people annoyed with me saying that right now because they are convinced that the BBC is a right-wing Tory mouthpiece. Now, you can't both be right about that, but you can both be wrong.
No, but it's definitely more liberal, and I know
think
this
that,
because
but I think society is liberal in general, and I think the people who run the BBC are very liberal, because I think,
society is, but then there is a certain type of liberalism that the people in charge embody. Most people in this country, I would say, are slightly more socially conservative. We're probably towards a centre right, ever so slightly to the centre right. I don't think we're all that liberal. I think it's because we think people our age and younger are very left-wing liberal, which is true. But, most people aren't that way inclined, and a lot of them...
Here's how it works. So if we have any programming on the BBC that questions whether or not Islam is a religion of peace, that goes in the right-wing, far-right ledger, as does any discussion on whether immigration's good for us. Now,
You're right, people on both spectrums are going to criticise the BBC, but the problem is, in an era of, streaming platforms, it's losing a lot of audiences, younger audiences particularly, to those streaming giants, and they're trying to play catch up in some ways. I mean, come on, they're talking about getting rid of BBC 4 for BBC 3. BBC 3 is shite, and okay, fine. I'm not saying don't have certain programs on there. You have to cater for a lot of people, but if you're constantly chasing after younger audiences, you're gonna lose your core audience. And you have to think about what makes the BBC so good. But at the same time, BBC is more than just programs. It encompasses news, radio.
But my point is, for people to class it as right wing, it only has to do really mundane things that aren't really... It should be valid to have a discussion on immigration. It should be valid to have a discussion on Islam. Those things are not right-wing by default, but they get characterised that way because that's how far society, or the culture or the zeitgeist has moved to the left. The culture has moved to the left. The left has won the culture war. Therefore, any discussion on immigration is perceived right-wing. Any discussion on Islam is perceived right-wing. However, there are clear instances of far-left bias on the BBC, and they are seriously incriminating. So we had not so long ago the instance on Newsnight of the Emily Mattis, the big anti-Dominic Cummings rant where she told us exactly how he was in the wrong, what he had done, and claimed to speak for the public mood. Now, this might seem not a big issue to people who don't live in the UK, but the BBC is state funded. It's a state broadcaster. They have to have some level of impartiality. They can report facts, they can report the news, they can invite opinion, but they can't lecture you about an issue, and they can't tell you how something is in an editorial way. They can't be so opinionated about it. And she would...
Yeah, but if she wouldn't have come out with a right-wing view, because that's what you said before, that's unacceptable. Some people said we're seeing like a left-wing version of Fox News.
Yeah.
I don't think we're quite there.
We're not quite there, but there has been smatterings of it. So it's like if she'd have ran against, say, Jeremy Corbyn in that manner, my word, everyone would have lost their head. Now, we saw that headline the other day as well, where after the BLM protests, the BBC tweeted out a headline saying, 20-something police officers injured during largely peaceful Black Lives Matter protest. So they had to let us know that Black Lives Matter protest was largely peaceful. 20-odd officers were injured, but, it was largely peaceful. Now, they have never, ever done that for any quote-unquote right-wing cause or rally that's been there. They've never said a couple of people injured, but it was a largely peaceful demonstration for free speech or whatever. I've been to some of these rallies to report, and the headlines are always police injured or fights break out during far-right rally. So when these people who turned up after Black Lives Matter the week later to defend the statues. Now, there were some right-wing elements, there were some veterans there were some people I would not get along with or like. There's probably some very nice people. There are good people on both sides, Iram. However, there were fewer people injured in that. So there were fewer people injured in them clashes than the Black Lives Matter clashes. However, the tone and the reporting and the editorialising of it was far more critical in terms of focusing on the unrest. One last thing before I have to bring in Owen Jones on this, because he got wind of Sky News' editorial guidelines on reporting about this protest, and Sky News had rightly said, you have to be very cautious about how you describe this. Don't lump all people in as right-wing. We don't know that. You shouldn't really say... You shouldn't link this to Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson did say he was going to come. He's turned out he's no longer going to come, and he's actually told his followers not to come. To be fair to him, he said he doesn't want to see people on the street, white people facing off black people on the street. That's not what he wants. So you have to give him credit where it's due. So there was this editorial guideline that was basically saying, be a fucking journalist. And Owen Jones lost his shit about it. Said if anyone needs to know about the sensibilities of Sky News and where they are and what their political leanings are, just look at this. And it's like, he's supposed to be a journalist, telling somebody to report the facts.
No, he's not. He's not a journalist. He's just a, glorified commentator.
I thought you were going to say communist then.
Articles. He's not a journalist, and he's not neutral, and he doesn't pretend to be either. I don't think there's anything wrong with those guidelines by Sky. But just to come back to the BBC, do you think we should still pay a license fee? Because if you don't pay it, you can't get in prison for it. So how will the BBC then fund?
Like everybody else. So I've always been against the license fee. And now this isn't necessarily because I hate the BBC. I think they do a great job with documentaries, news, some of their programming's pretty spectacular. But so are other sources, and I resent the fact that I don't have an opt-out. They are very draconian in the way they enforce this. So when I was at university, for instance, I shared a flat with 9 lads, and I had a TV in my room. Now, I would have quite happily have bought a TV license for the flat and shared it between 9 lads. They were students at the time. I barely had enough money for illegal drugs and alcohol. That's how brassic I was at university, right? And so we would have paid the TV license, shared it by 9. That would have been fine. But what they said was, actually, because you've got 9 separate tenancy agreements and you all have a lock on your door, well. You all individually have to pay a TV. I went, no thanks. I'll pay you when you come knocking on my door, which they can do. And you can tell them to go away and nothing happens. But there's no opt-out. And if you have the rule used to be slightly changed, but I think there are ways around it now, to be fair. But if you have equipment capable of receiving that broadcast, then you have to pay a license for it. And it just used to make sense in the time of public service broadcasting, which is how the BBC started out, to educate, to inform. It provided the news during the war, let you know what was going on. It was the hub of all your information. And now we have alternatives. You can easily, and most of us do, in fact, in the UK, not most of us should say, but most of us can, happily go our entire existence without watching a single piece of BBC programming, yet we have to have a TV license. And the people say... And people don't realise as well that the BBC does have a corporate arm. If you ever see something under the moniker of BBC Worldwide, that is their corporate arm. That is their money churner. Everything they sell from that makes the money on top of the TV licence as well. So it's not like the...
Yeah, and a lot of these people are on bloated salaries as well, aren't they? Some of these presenters earning millions so that they don't get poached by rivals. So... Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens in the future.
Someone should poach Nicky Campbell. Just have Nicky Campbell host everything. So I've got no real anti-BBC animus. I don't really subscribe to this whole...
I'm totally in favour of the BBC, but you're right. They can't.
But I'd like a choice. I'd like a choice.
License fee, yeah.
All right, well, it's been a pleasure. We've pretty much solved racism.
We have. We've ended every problem in the world.
Yeah, it's been lovely.
It has indeed.
Take care. And
good night.
Good night to you, madam. Thank you for listening to the Godless Spellchecker podcast. The podcast is a one-man operation produced in my spare time away from my day job, and I love making it for you. If you enjoy what you hear, please consider lending some support. The show is entirely listener supported. I don't sell anything, I don't run ads, and given the alternative and unpopular focus of my content, it's very unlikely to find a sponsor. So there are a number of ways you can support and chip in and help improve the show and give me more time to produce more content. You can become a patron supporter and pledge a monetary amount per month or per episode by visiting patreon.com/gspellchecker. If you can't lend monetary support right now, don't worry, there's other ways you can help the podcast too. You can share it on your various social media networks, or take a moment to leave a review wherever you listen to it. Your support is massively appreciated. Thank you. Think we've all learned something here today?